Come back. As you know, nearly 80% of our children in grade 4 cannot read for meaning. This really shows so many of the problems in our education system and in our society. The Basic Education Department is re-looking at its policy around teaching children to read. A big part of this may be around helping children, teaching children to read in their own languages. Many children in our country are forced to learn to read in English. Dr. Godwin Khosa is the CEO of the National Education Collaboration Trust. Dr. Khosa, good afternoon to you. We have such a massive crisis here. We've had different policies being implemented at different times. What kind of policy do you think we need to follow to make sure our children learn to read?
Well, there's got to be, good afternoon to you and your listeners, there's got to be clarity about how the country pursues the improvement in the teaching of reading. And that policy has to be clear about how we prepare the teachers to teach reading right from universities, how we support the teachers to teach reading, and what sort of methodologies have to be used by teachers to support reading so that the entire corps of teachers and subject advisors are clear about how to undertake this critically important function in the education system. So those discussions are underway. A group of experts and stakeholders in that space have actually been reflecting on what they've learned in the past years since the first reading improvement plan was adopted, and how to strengthen that policy for better results.
So, I mean, we have teachers who learned to teach. They were taught to teach. They were educated to teach at very different times. I mean, some before 1994, many after 1994. There have been different curricula as well in that time. Is that part of the problem? Not everyone is reading from the same hymn sheet. Not everyone is teaching to read in the same way.
Absolutely. I don't like blaming everything on apartheid, but we come from that era where the African languages and the preparation of teachers to teach African languages has not been, addressed in a manner that is in par with the two well-advanced languages in the country. So those aspects are now being opened up, and experts are looking at how to, support the development of these languages, from research into the languages to preparation of the teachers, as well as the preparation of the material that the learners have to read, and the material that has to be given to teachers to help them teach reading better.
The issue of language, as I understand it, a lot of our children go from their home language and then in grade 4 start to learn in English. And that's a huge transition. I mean, that's a major thing to do. How important is the issue of language here? Do we need to basically make sure that our children, or help our children, to learn to read in their home languages first?
So yes, but there's new evidence that is emerging, and it can only make matters more complex. So part of the evidence that's emerging is that our majority of our learners come from multilingual backgrounds, and in fact they are introduced to multiple languages, particularly your non-white young people in their own environments. I mean, it's quite common that a family could be made up of a father who speaks Xitsonga and a mother who speaks isiZulu or something like that. So that in itself creates a multilingual, background. But even in the streets, these kids could be exposed to, in fact, they're exposed to multilingual environments. But the evidence that's emerging is that these kids are quite capable of, managing multilingualism. These are new pieces of evidence that experts are starting to consider in order to construct better how we actually teach our kids to read, better. So that work is happening, and I think it's best to give specialists the space to assess and investigate the best ways in which we introduce, these languages to our young people.
And Dr. Khosa, I mean, to add to the complexity, and I mean, we can add and add and add to the complexity because it's very difficult. But I mean, if you had to say, children are all going to learn to read in their mother tongue, which would probably, educationally, I accept what you say about new evidence, would probably be quite an important thing to do. It would also mean that our classes would almost be racialized. There wouldn't be diversity. Diversity matters in classrooms.
So, absolutely. In the Eastern Cape, for instance, they have started, integrating African languages into the teaching of all the subjects to a point where your mathematics, question paper would actually have your, isiXhosa subtitles or even the question posed in isiXhosa. The results have shown that learners are performing a little better in that regard. We have to study and understand a little more what that would mean systemically across the country. But if you took the results that we saw in the past couple of weeks, there are some quick and tangible things that we need to do to get, learners to be able to read with meaning before we tighten the long-term, strategy for ensuring the transitions between home language and English, and making sure that we use a little more of home language in the teaching of all the subjects. And I think that's where the country needs to focus on. Which of those policy aspects will get us going as soon as possible? Which of those actions we need to take as soon as possible? We have to teach our teachers, teach our teachers on how to teach in reading in their mother tongue. We got to put material out in the classrooms that are age and language relevant for these kids to start reading. We've got to bring the household and the community into the mix to support reading improvement from the household. We have to monitor and report closely on how these things are done. We have to get our kids to write a little more about what they read, because that's part of the mix in helping them to understand what they're reading.
A big part of it must also be about reading materials. I think most homes in this country have very few books in them. There are lots of reasons for that. But that also takes us to the problem that a child may be learning to read. I was lucky enough to be sort of almost surrounded by books, and that meant that it grabbed my attention. And I think I probably still benefit from that privilege now. We need to make sure that there are more books, more things for children to read in their own homes and in their own communities.
Yeah, well, I would agree with you more. The most practical thing that we can do next week is for the schools to allow our young people to take some books home. They must read to their parents. That can be done almost immediately. There's longer term, stuff such as, let's get households to appreciate the importance of books. So instead of having a nice pictures are okay, but over and above having a nice pictures on the walls, let's have books in the bookshelves. Let's spend a little more money in the bookshelves. In books. So there's a cultural thing that will take time. That too, it's better to start to promote now. Nalibali released a very interesting report on the reading experiences in South Africa and how many books are in classrooms and so on in the past 2 weeks. It's very interesting that the availability of books at home and the reading behaviors across the languages are actually mirror image the performance of our learners across the languages in the PALS results. So that too, it's a very, very important, action to take from the side of households.
Another thing, of course, another intervention is around libraries. And most libraries around the country seem to be closed on Saturdays and Sundays. Now, this is, an obvious fix. I understand it's because workers don't want to work 6 or 7 days a week or work on weekends or whatever it may be. But if libraries played more of a central role, and I know that Nalibali has told us before that they're looking at, basically having community libraries in schools, one of the quick things that you point to that we could do. But if you make libraries the center of a community, you could really change things very quickly. You could excite the reading abilities of so many young people.
So where the libraries exist, these are resources that we must optimize. The libraries will have books, the libraries will have systems, the libraries will have, people. We just have to change the way we actually make use of these resources. What the Nalibali, research has shown us is the underutilization of the resources that already exist. And that too has to do with, at the center of it is change management. So all the key stakeholders have to come to agree on how we optimize the utilization of resources that already exist, in communities. I'm sure, an engagement with labor and that sort of thing can relax the constraints to, keeping libraries closed over weekends and during the times that our young people could be accessing them more.
Dr. Khosa, around the world there's another thing that's changing, which is how we access information. So I think for many people, you access information by reading through a book. People now access information on TikTok on their cell phones. You know, they do things in a different way. That's going to be a challenge. Have you ever tried to compete for a child's attention when they've got a cell phone and you've got a book?
Well, I think we need to change our, change management lens. So we mustn't try and keep these kids onto hard copy books. We must also explore possibilities for using technology to improve, the culture of reading. So one practical way in which the NECT is contributing in that regard is to convert reading material into WhatsApp versions. That can be distributed through WhatsApp. So you could distribute a couple of reading pages, onto WhatsApp. It's easy to send. It cuts down on the printing, costs. So that's one way in which we could actually take advantage of technology. We can't resist. That's how things are going to happen into the future.
Dr. Godwin Khosa, thank you. CEO of the National Education Collaboration Trust, really do appreciate the time.